Good afternoon, good rainy afternoon. You South Village people get a round of applause for venturing out and coming across the street. And we don't have any South Village storytellers today. Beth just noticed that as we were kind of making our list of who was going to go first. But we have 2 ladies and 3 Bobs. Isn't that fun? After we kind of got everything all put together, we thought, look, 3 Bobs and 2 nice ladies. We want to announce today that we will not be doing Tell Me a Story in March or in April. Our story coach, Joyce, is going to be gone most of the month of March, or a good bit of the month of March, and we can't do it without Joyce. And we're just going to take a break for 2 months, but we will be back in May, and that gives some of you time to screw up the courage to tell your story. We have to have storytellers or we can't do it. So let us know when you have your stories ready for us, and we'll be back in May. We are delighted to have our 5 storytellers today, and we're going to get started now with Jenny Little. Jenny lives in East Apartments and moved here in August of 2009, and she's going to share stories about the gift of music in her life and her family. Come on, Jenny.
Well, music was a hobby for everybody in my family. And when I was a little kid in grade school, both of my parents sang in a big chorus at Eastman Theater in Rochester. And every Monday they'd get a babysitter to take care of us. And then with 3 other people, they would all drive into Rochester. There were 5 in the car, and while they were driving in, it took 30 or 40 minutes to get there. So they would practice their music while they drove along. And of course, there was no air conditioning in cars then, so the windows were all open. One day they were on the way into Rochester and they were singing away. And then my dad heard a siren. He always drove. And he saw flashing lights behind him, and he pulled over and stopped. And a cop came up and looked in the window at the group, who had by now stopped singing. And he realized it wasn't a car full of drunks that he had pulled over. It was just some people singing. So he made up some excuse. Your left rear tail light is out, which it wasn't, and then sent them on their way. So they went ahead and sang in their chorus. Now, here's another anecdote about music. My friend next door, Betty, said this was true. All of us 3 kids played a band instrument by this time, and my dad played violin. So Mom played piano, so she went to the music store in Rochester and got a book for each one of us. You could pick out any instrument that was in your group, and they all went together. So she got the 5 books that we needed, and once in a while in the evening, we'd all get together around the piano and would play this. I don't know how it sounded, but we had a good time. We played things like Schubert's Serenade, things like that. Well, after a while, Betty next door told me, now remember, there's no air conditioning, the windows were open. Betty said that she was required by her English class to write a composition, and I think it was supposed to be something humorous. So she wrote a composition about these people next door to her, and how there was always music coming out, and she was always hearing it. And she said that one night she went to sleep while we were still playing our 5 instruments all together around the piano. And then when she woke up in the morning, I was already practicing on my flute, which I used to do for half an hour before breakfast when I was in high school. So she said it was like that we played all the time. We were playing music when she went to sleep, and somebody was still playing when she woke up in the morning. She never told me what grade she got on the composition, but anyway, that's what she said. Now, here's what happened one year at Christmas. Our family had certain Christmas traditions on Christmas Eve. Our dad read us, it was the night before Christmas, the well-known Clement Moore poem. And he always read us the famous letter, Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. And that's why my name is Virginia. Then, the 4 of us would crawl around behind and sit down behind the piano to sing Christmas carols. I mean, behind the Christmas tree. I cannot remember how that tradition got started, but 4 of us would get down and sit behind the Christmas tree, and Mom would play the piano, and we would sing Christmas carols. Well, one year, all the packages were wrapped and they were all put around the base of the tree, and my sister Holly looked at it, and there was a big box on one side and then all the presents around. And she said, "It's not balanced. There should be a big box on the other side." And right away, my dad said, "Oh, I've got a box I can put there." And we all laughed and made jokes about it. And he went upstairs to a closet where we would never go. And in a little while, he came downstairs with a great big carton wrapped up in white tissue paper. And we all laughed and made jokes about it. And then going up Christmas Eve, going up to bed, we were still laughing about the big box under the tree. And then Christmas morning, we opened all the packages, except the big box was still sitting up there. And my dad said to my sister, "Go ahead, Holly, open it up. It was your idea." And we all laughed. And she opened it up, and it was a new cello. She had started taking cello lessons, and she had been using an old rental instrument. And he got her a new cello and wanted it to be a surprise. And he grabbed the opportunity and surprised her.
Isn't this great? See why we want to hear from all of you. We want to hear from all of you. Now we're going to get to hear from Pam Worth. Pam has been here since January of 2008. She lives over in the health center, and she bombed over here today and avoided the rain. And she's going to tell you about her life full of miracles. Pam.
Okay, a little background. My husband and I were married on June 28, 1969. So that gives you an idea of the time frame. We went on our honeymoon to a very nice resort in the Shenandoah Mountains, and we spent that time Dave studying for the bar exam and me writing thank you notes. We went over to Germany within a year, and he was assigned to a SASCOM unit, and so we went to Hamel, which was about 8 to 10 miles from the Czech border, and well, I won't go into what they did. Anyway, it was Cold War, you remember. We went to Nuremberg one day and came back on a very rugged reconditioning road. And I knew how rough it was, awful rough. We went the next day to the detachment, and the driver was going so fast that he went past where we were supposed to turn, continued on, hit the markers on the right-hand side of the road, overcorrected, and went into hit a tree head-on, which split the car. I went through the windshield and landed on the bank. Everybody else, there were 6 of us in the car. The day before, it was before seat belts. And the engine came through the firewall, caught my husband's legs, and when the car rolled about the 3rd time, the engine released and went down to the ground, and Dave was released then. He landed, as did the other 4, into a freshly plowed, manured farmer's field. The one good thing, it made the landing a little bit smoother. The bad thing was It had been freshly fertilized. And he had extensive breaks in his legs, and that caused infections. German ambulance drivers were told to take people to the first available American hospital. Dave, being head of the detachment, knew that the closest one had been in Regensburg. However, he knew that it had closed the week before. So the German military were taking him to or the ambulance drivers were taking him to Regensburg, and he was on and off out of consciousness. And he realized when they pulled, for some reason he was alert enough, that when they pulled into Regensburg military hospital, where it had been, that it was no longer there. So he told the ambulance drivers in German that it was not there anymore, and to get them as fast as possible to the closest German hospital, which happened to be a 500-bed Catholic-run hospital that had the head orthopedic surgeon was the one who had in charge of the emergency room that night. So when he saw Dave, he got him right in. He started the blood transfusions and patched him up well enough that he stopped bleeding, and put him in a hospital bed there with 2 beds, one of which was empty. He was in trapezes all over. The doctor knew that Americans, because of the Vietnam War, were doing a lot of special things, surgery-wise. So he did not choose to do surgery, but to let Dave stay. Dave was missing 2 inches of bone. The doctor did take fluoroscopes of his leg injuries. And when a very uppity, ugly American type soldier doctor came over and to see what Dave's disabilities were, the doctor would not show him would not show him the fluoroscopes because of his attitude. Dave stayed there for a while. This wreck happened 9 days before our first anniversary. I was in a group that was taken to a 25-bed hospital, mostly emergency maternity hospital in Hangman. That same doctor came and wanted to take me by ambulance to Nuremberg, to the American hospital. Having been on the road, Highway 8, between Nuremberg and Hangman, I knew how rough the road was, and there was no way that I was going to go in an ambulance over that road. I had a dislocated shoulder. I had lots of pain in my legs. I did not want to go on that rutty road. The doctor kept saying I had to go. And I said, only by ambulance. And he said, no, can't do that. And I said, well, I'm staying right in. So he finally decided to fly me by helicopter to Nuremberg. I stayed there for a while, a few days. July 4th came, and I asked my doctor if he would allow me to go visit Dave, and he said yes, and he packed up all my stuff, and the top sergeant asked as we went through Hangtown, did I want to go on and see Dave, and I said yes. So I went on there instead of stopping by the house. I got to the hospital and went in. The doctor saw that I had my medicines and everything with me, and so they asked, this bed was empty, if I wanted to stay there with Dave, and I said yes. And so I got to stay with him and came back to Nuremberg July 5th or 6th, and in Nuremberg again by helicopter. And I don't know how much more time I have. I need to cut it. Okay, my life ever since then has been full of miracles.
Everything just worked out right on that trip to Germany, huh? Thank you so much, Pam. Now we're going to hear from Bob Spencer. And Bob Spencer is going to tell us that God is good. Listen up. Enjoy.
Thank you. I'll try. Good afternoon. Well, I'm not going to tell a funny story. I'm going to tell you one that is really a very serious story. Go with me all the way back to Thanksgiving Day, 1937. We had enjoyed our Thanksgiving dinner in the middle of the day, and after we had eaten, my mother sent the three youngest children out to play. And I was the middle child of the three going outside, and I was 7 years old. After we had played outside for quite a while, I began to feel sick. And I went back in the house to tell my mother I just didn't feel good. And she naturally thought that I had just eaten too much Thanksgiving dinner and had gone outside, and off with all the running and playing on that full stomach, I had upset that stomach. She tried to assure me that if I just go lie down and rest for a while, I'd be okay. Well, I did that, but I stayed on the bed all afternoon, and I didn't get better. It got worse. She fixed a small snack supper for those who wanted to eat, but I didn't want anything. And then when they had finished eating, she told the rest of them to clean up the table, and she was going to put me down for the night. She got me ready, put me in the bed, and told me that after a good night's sleep, I'd certainly feel better in the morning. Well, I didn't get a good night's sleep. It was a very restless night, and when morning came, I had slept very little, and I felt much worse than I did the night before. So my mother and daddy noticed that I was running a fever, and they decided that it was time to call the doctor. In 1937, the doctors still made house calls. They called, he came, and after taking a long time to examine me, checking my heart, my lungs very carefully, he turned to my mother and daddy and said, I hate to have to tell you this, but the child has pneumonia. In 1937, a diagnosis of pneumonia was almost a death sentence, because we didn't have penicillin and any of the modern day drugs that we have to fight that kind of disease. They came along about 10, 15 years later. So he and the doctor and my mother laid out a treatment plan for me, which included hot mustard plasters applied to the chest, and they burned, but I tolerated them, hoping that they were going to make me feel better. The doctor came each day, and each day he checked the temperature. It was just the fraction of a degree higher than the last time he checked it. And at the end of a week, he decided that I was probably the sickest patient he had, and he needed to see me twice a day instead of just once a day. So he started coming to our house first thing every morning, and then the last thing every afternoon before he went home. He was at our house. And about that same time, an uncle got sick, and he was diagnosed with pneumonia. Unfortunately, his condition deteriorated rapidly, and within a week he died. Well, I had now been sick for 2 weeks, and I saw how much his death upset my parents, how many tears my mother shed, and that bothered me a great deal. But now we're at this end of the second week of my illness, and the ladies in the neighborhood noticed that my mother was almost totally exhausted. She was staying up with me half the night and trying to get her work done during the day. So they quickly got together and organized themselves into teams of 2, and 2 of them would come in each night and stay up with me so my mother could get some sleep. Now we're into the 3rd week of my illness, and as we got down to the end of that 3rd week, we're now just a week before Christmas, and temperature had continued to rise. That morning, some of the family members came in and put up a Christmas tree in my room to brighten things up a little bit. And then about the middle of the afternoon, I slipped into a coma. The doctor came later and he checked my temperature and everything else, but then he turned to my parents and said, right now, his temperature is pushing 107. And with a temperature that high and already in a coma, he may not make it through the night. And of course, though I was there in a coma and I couldn't say anything, I couldn't move, but I could hear quite well. And I heard everything that's being said. The ladies who were to sit up with me that night later came in, and my mother and daddy went to bed. And I lay there trying to go to sleep, and eventually I did. But sometime in the middle of the night I woke up, and the 2 ladies staying with me were standing by the bed talking, and I don't know whether their talking was what woke me up or whether something else caused me to awaken, but anyway, what they were saying was that his breathing has gotten so irregular, I know he's not going to live till morning. And we need to go wake his mother and daddy right now and bring them in here, because I know they would want to be with him when he dies. But the other lady was not quite that urgent. She said, no, let's wait a little longer, because I don't think it's going to happen in the next hour or so. But I agree with you, he's probably not going to make it through the night. But let his parents get as much rest as they can, because if he does pass away, they're going to have a rough couple of days anyway. So I took that as a signal that I should start praying. And as a 7-year-old boy, you just pray a 7-year-old prayer. And it was very simple. Lord, please don't let me die. It would hurt my mother so. And that's the prayer I kept saying over and over and over. Please don't let me die. It would hurt my mother so. I don't know how long I did it, but it seemed like a long, long time to me. And then, suddenly, up in the upper left-hand corner of my room, I saw a blue light, a bright blue light, sky blue in color. Now, I knew that the family members had come in and put up the Christmas tree that day, but I didn't see anybody put a Christmas light up in that corner. But that's exactly what I thought it was. And then a voice came from that light. And I knew from the tone of that voice, that's not a Christmas light. And the voice said, you are not going to die. Now go to sleep. You need the rest. And almost as soon as those words were spoken, I couldn't stay awake. I got so sleepy, I immediately went to sleep. When I awoke the next morning, I could tell from the window that it was daylight outside. I couldn't hear the ladies who were staying with me, so I assumed that they had gone. And then I heard the doctor's voice in the next room. He was already there. And I think he was surprised that I was still alive. But he came in to check me over. And when he took the temperature, it turned out to be 106.5. And he called my parents in and told them that the temperature was 106.5 this morning. He says, now that's still far, far too high. But the significant thing is, this is the first time I've gotten a lower reading in 3 weeks. Every time I've checked it, it's been higher than the time before. He says, you try to keep him comfortable today, and I'll be back this afternoon, and we'll see where we need to go from here. Well, when he came back that afternoon, first thing he did was check temperature, and he found it was down almost to 106, just barely above 106. And he says, now, we can see that it has dropped another ½ degree during the day today. And he looked at my parents and he said, I do believe we may be turning the corner on this disease. And my mother thanked him and turned away so he wouldn't see her tears of joy. Well, I didn't get well quickly, but the doctor kept coming each day, and the temperature gradually dropped little by little over the next 2 weeks. And finally it was low enough that he felt comfortable with not coming back at all. But my mother started getting me out of bed then, put me in a chair, but I couldn't walk. I was so weak I couldn't walk, and primarily because when I was only 17 months old I had polio. I had just learned to walk good as a toddler at that time, and then because of the polio I didn't walk for a year. But I did learn to walk again and was walking well when I started school. But now they were having to work with me and try to help me to learn to walk again. And finally I got it so I could handle it, and was able to get back to school about the middle of February. So I had been out nearly 3 months, but I was back, and I'm here today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bob. Our next storyteller is Bob Gardner. Bob and his wife Betty moved here in June of 2011, and his wife died last summer, July of 2012. Bob wants to tell you about Betty, and he's going to do that in a story he calls Love Poems and Stories. Bob, would you come? I want to be sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Is that going to work?
I'm going to use this brochure as the basis of the message I'm talking about today. I'll have it up here in case somebody wants to look at it a little further. This is not a typical biography. Betty's poems tell her story. She writes in the various stages of her life, and it's presented in chronological order as she grew. This isn't about me, it's about her, and I'm just a supporting actor, you might say. I've omitted poems and letters because of time restraints. I think you will find that her story is basically the story of all of us. Put yourself in her place as we read some of her poems. Some of you may feel that the poems are a little too personal, but I want to share with you their beauty, their rhythm, their cadence. Maybe you'll find comfort and joy in being there with her. And I want you to know Betty better. This is an attempt to recapture the magic, the ecstasy, and the dreams of our young love found in the collection of Betty's poems and letters among her papers after her death. Although I knew she had written some poems, I had long ago forgotten where they were. How lucky I am to have found them. It's as if she was here with me, and she is, if only in my memory. But first let me share her poems with you that express her feelings about faith and about high school sweethearts and heartbreaks before we met. Her feelings are universal. Her ability to communicate these ordinary life experiences to me was remarkable. I wish I had found the poems earlier so I could have shared them with her as I now share them with you. About faith. You remember the psalmist said, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." At the age of 16, Betty wrote, "When I come to the end of a trying day in which my world has gone astray, I look at the red, the yellow, and blue of the sunset and all its brilliant hue. All my doubts of a power on high go winging like sparrows across the sky, for all the beauty and wonder above could only be made by a God of love." And I think back how similar that is to what the psalmist said, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Before my time, Betty wrote about other loves before her time made her heart sad and blue. Remember World War II, rationing, tires and gas? Here's a story about high school heartbreak. Doesn't it seem odd to you that it doesn't mean a thing to you when we meet by chance except a faint remembrance of our old romance? A faint remembrance of an old tune, an old Chevrolet, a full moon, my prayer, and all the things you are, Forest Hills, and 8 in a car. Of serious talks while holding hands, piccolos and hot swing bands, getting out and listening for the train, the sophomore party in the rain. Of Sunday nights at Hillendale, Christmas presents through the mail, chocolate cake in the color blue, and the many, many times I waited for you. Of course you don't remember fog and firecrackers that December, of school the last 2 weeks and the fight over a girl named Eeks. No, it's so easy to forget, and now your color's scarlet, but don't worry, it'll come out all right. I started making new memories the very next night. Do you remember waiting for the phone? Betty wrote about waiting. She was not waiting for me. Remember, this was before my time, and I would have known better anyway. I wait by the minute, the hour, the day when over the wire your voice comes my way. I do little things to make the hours fly, useless little things, as the seconds drag by. And when the hour passes and I don't hear from you, I start again, waiting, blue. I make excuses for you, saying you didn't forget, and hope and wish and pray that the call will come yet. Down at the bottom of that, she wrote, "Damn it." Betty wrote about our USO days. Betty was a hostess at the Morris Street USO in Durham, North Carolina, when we first met in the summer of 1945. I was in the Navy V-12 and NROTC program at Duke. She wrote U.S. Juliet and U.S. Romeo to honor all hostesses and service men. These poems describe what the USO was all about. They certainly are not about Betty and me. USO Juliet. She comes down to the USO to give some time to G.I. Joe. She helps him to forget his care, finds joy herself in being there. She changes her mood at the twinkling of an eye to match the mood of the boy nearby. She is not always happy, but her smile is bright, and where she is, things go all right. She's not always gay, sometimes shy, faithfully waiting for her right guy. But for the GI who has to roam, she brings a glimpse of the girl back home. U.S. Romeo. He's blonde, brunette, or just plain red, tall, dark, thin, or overfed. He's pleasant, bold, neat and shy, with a handsome grin and a roving eye. He's blue, he's helped, he's sometimes moody. This boy we meet in the line of duty. Whether Bill or Jack or Homer or Barney, he's always good at handing out Blarney. He's blue-eyed, brown-eyed, serious, merry. He's 18, 19, grown up, oh very. He hails from Chicago, New York, and San Antone, and thinks quite properly that no place like home, especially Brooklyn. He waltzes, he rumbles, he does the Lindy Hop, he fights the Civil War and comes out on top. He's not always perfect, he may like to fuss. He's fighting for his country, and he certainly suits us. The USO and the NROTC programs closed around the middle of 1946, and I returned home to Tennessee for the summer. I returned to Duke for my senior year that September, and we started going steady. My time is about up, and maybe I'll return for the rest of the story. But in case I don't, I want to read a couple of verses from my courtship days. I want to help build a dream. Hammers and nails are ordinary tools, the ones recognized by the world. Implements that villages, houses, and schools from the mighty forests unfurl. In building a dream, the tools are not made in a factory or sold from a store. They come from the heart, and the plans are laid on the soul's indelible floor. Well, I don't have time to read the whole poem, but I like that part, as well as the rest of it, by the way. And then a poem from the war years. Betty came out to California while I was stationed at Long Beach before going overseas to Korea. While waiting for her first child to be born, she wrote, "Lady in waiting, whiling away time, frivolously occupied dreaming up rhyme, awaiting the return of a Lieutenant J.G. and the arrival of a new little captain to be, filling up minutes with oh this and that, reading and writing and coffee and chat, walking to get tired enough to come home to sleep in a bed for two, all alone. Lady in waiting for oh such a lot, a sailor she loves and a tiny wee tot." Thank you.
we didn't know Betty very well. She didn't live here very long, and she became ill, but you have helped us know her better today, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. Bob has spent a number of weeks and months since Betty's death last July going through these poems and getting them into a form that he could have printed. So we thank you for sharing that with us. Two ladies, we had our two ladies, three Bobs. We've had two Bobs, and now we're ready for Bob number 3. Bob Cook is going to be our last storyteller today, telling us about life in Vettville. His wife Betty shared a story with us earlier in our storytelling, one of the earlier months. And they live in East Apartments. Many of you know them. They've lived here since 2000. You've lived here quite a while. We're going to enjoy your story as well. Bob, please come.
Good afternoon. You know, a few days ago in our Residents Association meeting here in this room, we had the lady from downtown at the museum, and she was talking about the exhibit that she had just developed down there describing World War II and all the things that went with it. And you know, during that program, she showed a picture of Vettville at NC State. How many of you are veterans in here? How many of you lived in a Vettville somewhere? Okay, several of you. Okay, all right. Now, after World War II and the Korean War, one of the finest things that I think our government ever did was to come up with the idea of the GI Bill. And in order to reward those veterans who served during those two conflicts and two wars, they made available an education program that permitted the veteran to either develop a skill or develop a craft or to go to college to get a 4-year degree, either a BS or an AB. They provided a small stipend to let you live. They provided a tuition, and they provided a little stipend to pay for the books. So you could go to school under the GI Bill, and I think it was one of the finest things that ever happened. Well, I had already been to college, but as I missed World War II draft by 3 months, but in the first draft of the Korean War, I was number 1 on the list. And I was gone. So at the end of that Korean War, when I came back, in the meantime, Betty and I were married and had one little girl. And so I came out of the service and took a job teaching school. And I taught high school 1 year, and we came about as near starving to death as we ever have in our life. Salaries were so low. Our oldest little daughter was sick all the time, and time we paid the doctor bills, we had nothing left, so we just about starved. So I, being a good economist, came to the conclusion real quick that if I could go back to the university and get an assistantship that would pay me 1/2 time to go to graduate school and then take my GI Bill, I could make more take-home pay than I could do it while I was teaching school. So why not? So back to Morgantown, West Virginia we went. I got a half-time assistantship, and I started working on a master's degree and using my GI Bill. And we actually had more take-home pay than while I was teaching school. So after a period of time at that, I finished that degree and figured out that I had about enough time left to transfer somewhere else and maybe work on a PhD. And NC State was the school of choice. So I came to NC State, and immediately after we got here, one of our first objectives was to get housing in Vettville. Now, what is Vettville? Vettville was a concoction put together by universities of old Army barracks, old Army trailers, and in our case here at NC State, a bunch of little prefab houses that they called UKs. They were little square houses, 4 rooms, and they called them UKs because they were designed to be shipped to the United Kingdom. But at the end of the war, they were surplus, so the universities grabbed them up and used them for veterans housing. So we applied and got accepted to live in one of the little UKs, a little square house, a small living room, a small kitchen big enough to eat in and keep the old wringer washer if you pushed it into the corner, and 2 little bedrooms, and then 1 little alcove in the middle for the oil stove. That's what the rent was $27 a month, and they furnished the water and electricity. The only thing we had to furnish was the oil to heat in the wintertime. So it was a real deal. So we moved into Vettville, and a couple of days after we got there, we had our first rainstorm. Then lo and behold, we had to put a dishpan in the middle of the bed because we had a leak in the roof. Okay? We were able to move the bed around enough that night to be able to sleep and get out from under the drip. And by going back to the office the next day, they sent somebody down and patched the roof, so we got that problem taken care of. But anyway, life in Vettville, and these little prefab houses, which there were a little less than 30 of them in a group, and the prefab houses were for graduate students, and they had the barracks and the trailers were primarily undergraduates. Students, they were up on the hill on the other side. So in our little area, we became quite a tight little community. As I say, we paid only $27 a month and had to pay our own rent. They had flat roofs, so we had a roof. We got that fixed. And so they were just excellent little places to live. And first of all, one thing we had to do, though, on the side is we had to mow our own yard. We didn't have a lawnmower. But one of the enterprising graduate students who lived over on the back row bought a $29.95 special from over at Sears, and with providing a gas can and the cast to go with it, he rented that lawnmower to us for 1 penny a minute so we could mow our yard. So I could go get the lawnmower from him, he would time me, I'd come back to the house, mow the yard, and if I was fast, I could get done in less than 30 minutes, but sometimes it took a little longer, so it cost less than 30 cents to mow the yard. But we got the job accomplished. Now, living in Vettville was probably about as close to being in a commune as we've ever been. It was really a little group of all the people in the same boat. None of us had any money, but we shared, and we shared alike. Our immediate next door neighbor was a Mormon couple from Utah. They were very frugal. We had a telephone. They didn't have a telephone. They used our telephone, so we never locked our door, so they ran in and out and used the telephone at will. But in return, the Mormon church here in town had a food kitchen over at their old church, which is on Glenwood Avenue, and they bought dent and bent cans from a place here in town that sold them at auction, and they let us go to their food pantry to get part of our food, so that helped us out, so that compensated for the telephone. So it worked out real well. And you know, there was always someone in the unit that had been a mechanic in the Army, so they took care of all of our cars and fixed everything like that. They took care of those. We never had a transportation problem because someone was always willing to take your wife or your kids to the doctor if you couldn't go, because we just shared and shared alike. So it worked out to be a real community effort. Our immediate neighbor right behind us had his yard and a garden, so he shared vegetables with us. So that worked out extremely well. Now, to supplement all this income, when we came to Raleigh, Betty got a part-time job over at Sears and Roebuck, which was located then in Cameron Village. And she went to work at 5 in the afternoon. I would come home from school at 5 o'clock, and by then we had 2 little girls. I'd come home at 5 o'clock. I'd make sure that the girls got their dinner, got them tucked in for the night, and then I could study until she got home from work at night. And then she also did that on Saturday. So it supplemented, but it worked out real well. Now, Betty working at Sears, she worked in the fabric department. So she would take advantage of remnants and things like that became available in the fabric department, and she made my sports shirts. And I had the nicest looking sports shirts in Vettville. There's no doubt about it, because everybody else was still wearing khakis because that's all we had. So, but she made my sports shirts. Also, her father was a dairyman, and her mother would send her print feed sacks, and she made our girls dresses out of feed sacks. And they were some very, very attractive dresses. We still have pictures of them. The girls don't believe it, but it was true. Okay. But anyway, living in Bentonville was a real experience, and it was a real, some of our best friends to this day are still some of those that we made while we were in Bentonville, and we keep in touch with them all the time. Now, to wind up, I finally got through graduate school, got a degree, and had to hunt a job, which I was very anxious to do. After looking at all the opportunities, I took a job at the University of Florida. Well, we had a problem. We had to get from Raleigh to Gainesville, Florida. Well, we found out pretty soon that one of our friends wanted to do the same process as we had. He wanted to go to Florida to do his graduate work, and his wife was from out at Wendell here. So after talking with him, he borrowed his father-in-law's cattle truck, and we cleaned it out first. And we loaded all of his furniture and all of our furniture in the cattle truck and took off for Florida. We had it, excuse me, we had the load partially covered, and but we were sure, you know, that Betty was absolutely sure that we were going to get in a big rainstorm and we'd ruin everything we ever had. But anyway, we were trailing along, following Lim in the cattle truck, and she in the car with the little girls and all, and somehow the little Bible got put in the car, and so she opened it up, and the first verse she came to said, "O ye of little faith."
Bob, I'm going to tell a tale on you. Bob was not sure that this would be a story you all would be interested in. But I told him, yes, please. Betty encouraged him to. So that's just an example. There's a story that you have to tell. You may not think we want to hear it, but we do. We really do. We really do. I don't know what memories these stories today have stirred up in you, but I'm sure they have. I was reminded of my 6th grade teacher. Maybe I'll tell that story someday. But the point is, be open to what memories you have that you could share with us. Let me remind any of those of you who came in late, we will not have the stories in March or April. We're going to take a break. Our story coach is going to be gone, and we're just going to take a couple of months off. So that gives you a lot of time to be thinking of stories, all right? Please let Phyllis or I know if you'd like to just toss a story idea out to us and let us hear what you have to say. Phyllis, you have anything else to say? Joyce, anything else to say? Thank you, storytellers, so much. Thank you.